Be me, working as a QA tester at a mid-sized tech company. The pay is decent, the work is tolerable, and for a while, the office politics were manageable. You just had to keep your head down, do your job, and collect your paycheck. That all changed about a year ago when the company went on a huge diversity and inclusion kick. They hired a bunch of new people, mostly for non-technical roles like marketing and HR. That's when we got Glenda. Glenda was hired for the marketing team. On her first day, she sent out a company-wide introductory email. It wasn't just, "Hi, my name is Glenda, I'm excited to be here." It was a manifesto, a full 3 paragraphs about her commitment to dismantling systemic power structures, complete with her pronouns in the subject line. Her email signature was a piece of art. It had her name, her title, her pronouns, she, her, written in a bright pink font, and a rotating quote about social justice at the bottom. A few of the older guys in engineering just replied with, "Welcome," which I guess was the wrong thing to do. She sent another email, a gentle reminder about the importance of acknowledging people's full identity in professional communication. Life in the office became a walking on eggshells simulator. Glenda appointed herself the unofficial culture cop. She'd correct people in meetings if they said, "you guys," suggesting folks or everyone instead. She had a mug on her desk that just said "male tears" in big blocky letters. If you made a joke that wasn't pre-approved by the committee in her head, she'd give you this long, disappointed stare. The worst part was the kitchen talk. You couldn't just get a coffee in peace. She'd be there, talking loudly about some article she read about toxic masculinity in the workplace. Most of us just developed a sixth sense for when she was near the coffee machine and timed our breaks to avoid her. The management loved her. She was always volunteering to lead new initiatives and run sensitivity workshops. For them, she was a walking, talking symbol of how progressive the company was. For the rest of us, she was a source of constant, low-grade anxiety. This whole situation was our normal for the better part of a year. We all just kind of adapted. We learned the buzzwords, we nodded along in meetings, we kept our real thoughts to ourselves. It was exhausting, but it was survivable. Then, a few months ago, the company hired a new senior developer. That's when James showed up. I was there on his first day. Our project manager was giving him the office tour. James was the complete opposite of Glenda's ideal new hire. He was in his late 30s, I'd guess. Quiet guy, dressed simply, no logos or slogans. He had this calm, unreadable expression. He just listened, nodded, and shook hands. When he was introduced to the team, he just gave a small smile and said he was looking forward to getting started. No life story, no mission statement. He set up his desk with quiet efficiency. 2 monitors, a mechanical keyboard, a bottle of water, and that was it. His workspace was a perfect reflection of him. Clean, functional, and zero fluff. Of course, it didn't take long for the office predator to spot new prey. Glenda must have a radar for new male employees. She swooped over to his desk around mid-morning, her male tears mug in hand. A few of us in nearby cubicles pretended to be working, but we were all listening. This was the moment of truth for any new guy. She started with her usual script, a big, fake-sounding welcome. She introduced herself. "I'm Glenda," and then immediately followed it with, "My pronouns are she, her." She then paused, smiling expectantly at him, waiting for him to offer his own. James didn't even turn his whole body. He just angled his head slightly away from his monitor. He looked at her, his expression perfectly neutral. "James," he said, "nice to meet you." And then he turned back to his screen. The silence was incredible. You could feel the gears grinding in Glenda's head. She stood there for a solid 10 seconds, which feels like an hour in an open-plan office. She was clearly waiting for more, for him to play the game. He just kept typing, the clicks of his keyboard the only sound. Finally, she let out a little, "Okay," and scurried back to her marketing corner. I risked a glance over my monitor. Another engineer, a guy named Dave, caught my eye and gave the tiniest, almost imperceptible nod of approval. The resistance had a new, unwitting hero. We all thought that would be the end of it. Maybe she'd just write him off as a lost cause and leave him alone. We were wrong. For Glenda, his refusal to engage wasn't a sign to back off. It was a challenge. A few days later, the first real test came in the form of an email. Glenda sent one of her typical marketing blasts to a group that included the dev team. It was about some new campaign synergy or whatever. James needed a technical clarification. The professional thing to do would be to just reply and ask the question. But in our office, everything was a minefield. Glenda's signature, as usual, was a festival of fonts and personal branding. Glenda, she, her. We all waited to see how James would handle it. His reply came about 10 minutes later. It was a model of efficiency. Glenda, could you please clarify the API endpoint for the user data query? Thanks, James. That was it. No pronouns, no fluffy intro or sign-off. Just business. His own signature was just his name and senior developer. I was walking to the printer, which was near the marketing section, a little while later. I saw Glenda staring at her screen, her face tight. She was rereading his email, over and over. Then she let out this loud, theatrical sigh that made a few heads turn. She was making sure people noticed she was offended. It was a passive-aggressive declaration of war. James didn't seem to notice or care. He was just coding. The next phase of her campaign was public ambushes. The kitchen became her preferred hunting ground. I remember one afternoon, James was just trying to make a cup of tea. Glenda came in with one of her marketing friends, and they cornered him by the microwave. She started a loud conversation, clearly for his benefit, about how the tech industry was fundamentally broken and built on a foundation of male privilege. Her friend nodded along enthusiastically. Then, Glenda turned directly to James. The question was so loaded it was practically dripping with condescension. She asked him, as a man in tech, what he was actively doing to dismantle the patriarchal systems he benefited from. The kitchen went quiet. Another developer who was just getting water froze with his hand on the dispenser. It was a classic trap. There was no right answer. If he agreed, he was admitting guilt. If he disagreed, he was a monster. If he stayed silent, he was complicit. James just finished stirring his tea. He took a slow, deliberate sip. He looked at her, not with anger or fear, but with a kind of mild curiosity, like he was observing a strange bird. I write clean, efficient, and well-documented code, he said, his voice completely level. It makes the product better, and my team's job easier. I find that helps everyone. Then he just nodded politely and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her standing there. The other developer at the water cooler choked back a laugh and quickly filled his bottle and left. Glenda was left speechless. He hadn't fought her. He had simply refused to play on her battlefield. He defined his value by his work, not by his participation in her ideological drama. To her, this was an even greater insult than arguing. After the kitchen incident, she moved the fight to the digital realm. We used a company-wide chat program for communication. There was a general channel that was supposed to be for company announcements and casual talk. Glenda treated it as her personal blog. She started posting articles. 10 ways to be a better male ally in the workplace. Why your good intentions aren't enough. Unpacking your unconscious bias. Most people just ignored them, but then she started getting more direct. One morning, she posted a particularly aggressive article about how men's silence on social issues was a form of violence, and then she tagged him. Directly. James, would love to get your perspective on this as one of our senior tech leads. The entire channel went dead. It was the digital equivalent of calling someone out in the middle of the town square. Everyone was watching. What would he do? James's status icon showed he was active. He was online. He definitely saw the tag. Minutes ticked by. An hour passed. Complete silence from him in that channel. Then, in the dedicated Dev Project Odyssey channel, a new message popped up from him. Team, I've just pushed the final components for the authentication module to the staging server, ready for QA when you are. The documentation has been updated. He had completely, utterly, and publicly ignored her. He didn't just not respond, he responded to something else entirely, something work-related, demonstrating what he considered important. The message was clear. I am here to work. You could almost hear the shriek of rage from across the office. A few minutes later, I saw Glenda furiously typing, her fingers hammering the keyboard. She was probably sending him a barrage of angry direct messages. I found out later from one of the other devs that she had. She had accused him of being deliberately obtuse, of fostering a toxic environment, of being a textbook example of what was wrong with the industry. His only reply to her wall of text was a single sentence. My apologies, I must have missed your message in the general channel. I'm currently focused on the Q3 deployment. He was a master of professional detachment. He gave her nothing to grab onto. This went on for weeks. It became a pattern. Glenda would set a trap, a public test designed to force him to acknowledge her worldview. James would sidestep it with polite, unwavering professionalism. She tried to corner him in a project meeting, turning a discussion about deadlines into a lecture about how aggressive timelines are a product of hustle culture toxicity. The project manager, a guy who was usually terrified of Glenda, looked like he was about to have a stroke. James just waited for her to finish, then calmly said, "So, for the database migration, are we sticking with the original schema or moving to the revised one? We need to lock that in to meet the proposed deadline." He completely steered the conversation back to the actual work. The manager looked so relieved he almost cried. With every failed attempt, Glenda grew more and more frustrated. She started trying to turn other people against him. I'd overhear her complaining about him to her friends in the marketing department. She wasn't just saying she disliked him. She was using the corporate language she knew so well. She wasn't angry, she was concerned. James wasn't just quiet. He was creating a chilling effect on open communication. He wasn't just focused on work. He was unwilling to engage with the company's core values. He was guilty of microaggressions by not validating her identity with every interaction. It was a masterclass in twisting professional conduct into a thought crime. Some of the newer, younger employees who looked up to her started buying into it. They'd give James weird looks in the hallway. They'd stop talking when he walked into the break room. But the core group of us, the engineers and testers who had been there for years, saw exactly what was happening. James wasn't an aggressor. He was just a normal guy trying to do his job. He treated everyone, male and female, with the exact same level of quiet, professional respect. He judged people on the quality of their work, not the content of their social media bios. The person creating the toxic environment was the one constantly trying to force everyone to pick a side. We didn't say anything out loud, of course. We were too conditioned to stay quiet and avoid trouble. But there was a silent groundswell of support for him. People started going to him for technical advice more often, deliberately bypassing the more politically correct, but less competent senior dev. Little things. A nod in the hallway. An extra coffee pod left by the machine after he used the last one. We couldn't fight her battle for him, but we could show him he wasn't alone. The breaking point came during a company-wide town hall meeting. The CEO was on stage, talking about quarterly earnings. At the end, there was a Q&A session. Glenda naturally got the first question. She stood up, took the microphone, and didn't ask a question about the business. She gave a speech. It was about the company's culture. She talked about how, while we had made progress, there were still pockets of resistance and individuals who failed to embrace our values of inclusivity and open dialogue. She never said James's name, but every single person in that room knew who she was talking about. It creates an environment where some of us, she said, her voice quivering with emotion, don't feel psychologically safe to bring our whole selves to work. It was the ultimate escalation. She was taking her personal vendetta and painting it as a company-wide crisis in front of the CEO. I glanced over at James. He was sitting a few rows ahead of me. I expected to see him looking angry or nervous, or at least uncomfortable. He wasn't. He was just sitting there, watching the CEO, his expression unchanged. He looked like a man listening to a weather report. It was information, and it didn't seem to affect him personally. The CEO gave a bland corporate answer about being committed to safety and taking all concerns seriously. But the damage was done. Glenda had drawn a line in the sand and publicly declared James an enemy of the people. I knew then that this wasn't going to end with sighs and passive-aggressive emails anymore. She was going for the kill. She was going to get him fired. Sure enough, the very next morning, the rumors started flying. Glenda had been seen going into the HR director's office, and she was in there for over an hour. She had a binder with her. A binder. She had been compiling a dossier on him. Every ignored email, every sidestepped conversation, every time he just did his job instead of performing the required emotional labor, she had written it down. She was building a case, brick by brick, out of nothing. She was framing his professionalism as a pattern of harassment. Later that afternoon, the email arrived. It was from the head of HR. The subject line was chillingly vague. Follow-up discussion. It was addressed to James, Glenda, our project manager, and me. I was confused for a second. Why was I included? Then I realized My desk was right next to James's. I was a witness. The meeting was scheduled for the next day. A feeling of dread settled over the entire department. This was it, the final showdown. Glenda looked smug all afternoon. She walked around the office with an air of triumph, like she had already won. James, for his part, looked exactly the same as he always did. He just kept coding. As I packed up to leave for the day, he was still there, headphones on, focused on his screen. He was either a fool or a man with a plan, and I had a front row seat to find out which. The next day felt like the prelude to a hurricane. The air in the office was static. People were talking in hushed tones, stealing glances at James's desk, then at the closed door of the conference room. Glenda had come in wearing what I can only describe as her battle armor, a severe-looking blazer, her hair pulled back tightly, and a look of grim determination on her face. She was radiating an aura that said, "Justice is coming." James arrived at his usual time, coffee in hand. If he was nervous, he didn't show it. He sat down, logged in, and started reviewing code. It was surreal. At 10 a.m., sharp my manager walked over to my desk and James's. He had a pained look on his face, the look of a man who would rather be anywhere else in the world. "They're ready for us," he said quietly. The walk to the conference room felt a mile long. Inside, Glenda was already seated at one side of the large table, her infamous binder open in front of her. On the other side sat the director of HR, a woman named Carol, who was usually all smiles but now looked incredibly serious. My manager took the seat at the head of the table. James sat next to me, placing a slim leather-bound notebook and a pen on the table in front of him. He didn't seem to have any other evidence. The HR director started the meeting. Her tone was sterile and formal. She explained that a formal complaint had been filed regarding the work environment and that this was a fact-finding meeting. She then turned the floor over to Glenda. Glenda took a deep breath, like an actress preparing for a monologue. She began by saying how much she loved the company's values and how she had tried to be a champion for them. Then she started on James. She painted a picture of a calculated campaign of psychological warfare. She used all the buzzwords. A pattern of dismissive behavior, refusal to engage in collaborative culture building, creating an environment of exclusion through passive negativity. She talked about the pronoun incident on his first day, framing it not as a simple introduction, but as a deliberate rejection of her identity. She brought up the email exchange, calling his professional brevity an act of erasure. She described the kitchen incident as a public display of his contempt for important social discourse. She was good, I had to admit. She never raised her voice. She spoke calmly, weaving a narrative where James was a villain who never had to throw a punch. His crime was his silence, his neutrality. She opened her binder and had dates and times for every perceived slight. On October 5th, during the marketing sync-up, James completely derailed a conversation about inclusive language in our ad copy by redirecting to a technical query. On October 12th, I shared a vital resource on allyship in the general chat, and he pointedly ignored it, a clear signal to others that these topics are unwelcome. She went on like this for almost 20 minutes. Throughout it all, James just sat there. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the HR director, listening intently. Occasionally, he would jot down a note in his notebook. He was completely still, completely focused. When she finally finished, there was a heavy silence in the room. Glenda sat back, looking emotionally drained but righteous, as if she'd just unburdened her soul. The HR director, Carol, looked down at her own notes for a moment. Then she turned to James. "James, we've heard Glenda's perspective. We'd like to hear yours." James closed his notebook. He hadn't written much. "Thank you," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I will address the points raised." He didn't look at Glenda. He addressed his words to Carol and our manager. "Regarding my introduction," he began, "I introduced myself by my name. My goal on my first day was to get my development environment set up and begin to understand the code base, as that is what I was hired to do. Regarding the email communication," he continued, "my email signature contains my name, title, and contact information. This is the professional standard I have used for my entire career. The email in question was a technical request for clarification to unblock a task. I addressed Glenda by her name to ensure the request was directed to the correct person." He was methodical. He took each of her accusations and stripped them of their emotional language, leaving only the bare facts. Regarding the conversation in the kitchen, he he said. I was asked a question about my role in a broad social context. I answered it based on my professional function. I contribute by performing my job to the best of my ability, which supports the entire team's success. I then returned to my desk to continue working. He paused, and then he did something I didn't expect. He opened his laptop, which had been closed until this point. I believe the core of the complaint is that I have created a hostile or unsafe environment through my communication, or lack thereof. I want to be clear. My focus at work is work. I treat all my colleagues with the same professional courtesy. He turned his laptop around. On the screen was the project management software we used. Here is my communication record with every member of the Project Odyssey team for the last month. Here is my chat with Sarah from design. Here is my chat with David from the back-end team. And here is my chat with Maria from QA. His chats were all identical in tone, polite, direct, and 100% focused on the project. There was no small talk, no personal discussion, just work. My communication style is consistent. It is not personal. It is professional. Then he brought up the email server logs. Here are all the emails I have sent to Glenda. And here are all the emails I have sent to the other 4 members of the marketing team I interact with. You will find the tone and structure are exactly the same. He was systematically proving that he wasn't singling her out. He was simply being himself, a focused, private person. He wasn't ignoring her, he was ignoring all non-work-related distractions. He had turned her argument on its head. She claimed he was targeting her. He proved he was treating her exactly the same as everyone else. The person who was obsessed with identity was now being undone by the principle of equality. The HR director leaned forward, looking intently at the screen. Our manager, who had been slumping in his chair, sat up straighter. Glenda's smug expression was starting to falter. She was looking at James's evidence with a dawning look of horror. Her binder, full of feelings, was being countered with a mountain of cold, hard data. Finally, Carol, the HR director, turned back to Glenda. Her voice was no longer neutral. It was sharp. Glenda, let me be very direct. In all your documentation, is there a single instance of James insulting you, using derogatory language, raising his voice, or refusing a work-related request? Glenda opened her mouth, then closed it. Did he ever refer to you by the wrong pronouns? Carol pressed. He didn't use any pronouns, Glenda stammered. He used your name, correct? Glenda? Yes, but... And is there any evidence that his professional conduct has negatively impacted the project's timeline or quality? Well, no, but his attitude... The manager finally spoke up. His voice was tired but firm. Carol, if I may. James's work has been exemplary. He's cleaned up a significant amount of technical debt. He documents everything, and he has been a huge asset to my team. The project is actually ahead of schedule, in large part thanks to him. He then turned to me. You sit next to him. Have you ever witnessed him being hostile or disrespectful to anyone? All eyes were on me. I took a breath. No, he's quiet. He just works. He's helped me out a few times with some complex test cases. He's always been professional. The case was crumbling. Glenda's narrative had been completely dismantled. She was left sitting there with a binder full of misinterpreted events and hurt feelings. The HR director closed her own notebook. The meeting was over. Thank you all, she said. We'll be in touch. We were dismissed. James packed up his laptop and notebook and left without a backward glance. I followed him out. Glenda stayed behind with the manager and HR director. We didn't know what was being said behind that closed door, but about 30 minutes later, the verdict was clear. Our manager sent a brief, concise message to the entire department chat. Team, a reminder. Company communication channels are for work-related purposes only. Let's keep our discussions focused on our projects to maintain a productive environment for everyone. Thank you. It was corporate speak for, Glenda, shut up. Glenda emerged from the conference room later. Her face was pale and blotchy. She didn't look at anyone. She walked straight to her desk, packed up her personal items, including the male tears mug, and left the office without a word. We all thought she had been fired. It turned out she had received a formal written warning for misuse of company time and for creating a disruptive environment. The warning stated that any further complaints found to be without professional merit would lead to termination. She had been publicly officially neutered. Her power, which was built entirely on intimidation and appeals to authority, was gone. She used all of her vacation and sick days over the next 2 weeks. When she came back, she was a different person. She was silent, she didn't talk in the kitchen, she didn't post in the general chat. She just did her work and went home. The change in the office was immediate. It was like a cloud had lifted. People started talking to each other again. Jokes were told without someone looking over their shoulder. The tension that had permeated everything was just gone. We were all more productive. We were all happier. James, of course, didn't change at all. He came in, did his work, and went home. He never mentioned the meeting. He never gloated. He didn't have to. His victory was quiet, just like him. He didn't win by fighting back. He won by refusing to fight. He just stood his ground on the simple principle that work is for work. And in the end, in our little corner of the world, the facts actually mattered more than the feelings. It was a nice change.